Okay.
So, hi. First of all, thanks for the invitation to be part of this workshop. It's a very interesting event, 3 full-day workshop on transformative change. It doesn't get much better than that. So in that sense, the workshop in itself could actually be transformative. So I'm very glad to be part of it. I'm Ingrid Visseren. I work at Radboud University in the Netherlands and have been involved in the IPBES Global Assessment over the past couple of years. So I want to do 3 things with you today. First of all, I want to go back to the IPBES Global Assessment and reflect on how we defined the concept of transformative change there. And then I want to move beyond the IPBES Global Assessment. You know, it came out about a year ago and our thinking hasn't stopped since then. So I want to share with you the current thinking that we've done in a smaller group of authors on the concept of transformative governance. And then I want to share with you some reflections on what transformative change in terms of values actually could entail. And I want to do so by proposing an 18th Sustainable Development Goal. But first, let's go back to the main conclusions of the IPBES Global Assessment. So perhaps the most well-known conclusion of the assessment is that we estimated that around 1 million species around the world are threatened with extinction. And basically, virtually all indicators of the global state of nature are decreasing, and you could reframe it in a way that the sheer fabric of life on Earth is deteriorating fast around the world. And we've also, as humanity, deeply reconfigured the vast majority of all types of ecosystems around the world. On a more positive note, the assessment also says that we can actually still bend the curve, if you will. We're able to do something about it still, but if we really want to do something about it and stop this mass extinction, then transformative change is needed. And we actually defined the concept of transformative change in the assessment as a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including in terms of paradigms, goals, and values. And that basically means addressing the underlying societal causes of unsustainable practices, or in IPBES terminology, transforming the indirect drivers. And the reason or how we got to this conclusion of the need for transformative change is because we applied the IPBES conceptual framework in our assessment. And through this application of this framework, we actually, I'm looking for my mouse, yeah, here. So we actually concluded that sustainability policies have actually been focused on the direct drivers, which are land use change, overfishing, pollution, climate change, so things that are happening on the ground and in the water. And our sustainability policy has not been enough focused on the indirect drivers. So how we've organized our economic systems, the fact that a lot of our policies still support unsustainable practices. So in the assessment, we also started thinking about how to enable and accelerate this transformative change. And I won't spend a whole lot of time on this figure, but I do want to highlight that we actually started thinking about transformative governance, or what kind of governance is needed to enable transformative change also in the assessment. So since the assessment, like I said at the beginning, in a smaller group, we've started to think about this concept of transformative governance. And I do want to highlight the difference between the concepts transformative change on the one hand and governance on the other. I think it's an important difference also for our discussions in the workshop this week, because the change is really the change that's needed, the transformation of the indirect drivers, and a governance is how to get there. And these are 2 different things. And a really important differentiation, because having ambitious goals, so what transformative governance actually means, having these goals is important, but it's not enough. History has taught us that time and time again. Also, the ACHI targets incorporate attention to indirect drivers, but there's a huge gap between these goals and the policy or the governance instruments that we apply to try and achieve those goals. So these governance instruments, also for the ACHI targets, but just in generic thinking about governance as well, often these instruments are not focused on the indirect drivers. So if we want to enable transformative change for biodiversity governance, we don't only need protected areas and better manage protected areas, but we also, and perhaps especially, need more economic and policy reform in order to address those underlying societal causes. And also, when addressing the indirect drivers, we might actually place the responsibility with those where it matters most and where perhaps the responsibility also belongs. So not only with consumers, but also with producers and with governments. Because by not addressing the indirect drivers, what we've in fact done is place a lot of responsibility with consumers, asking them to pay more for healthy and sustainable products. So based on a literature review, we have come to the following proposal, that governance can become transformative if and only if it combines four different governance approaches, which I'll walk you through in a minute. And these governance approaches need to be operationalized in a specific manner. And of course, they need to be focused on the indirect drivers. So governance needs to be integrative, operationalized in a way to ensure that local solutions have sustainable impacts at other scales and locations, on other issues and in other sectors. So this is related to the debate on mainstreaming or telecoupling. Governance also needs to be inclusive, operationalized in a way to empower those whose interests are currently not being met, and also those who represent values that contribute to sustainable development. Governance needs to also be adaptive, since transformative change and governance and how we understand them are moving targets. This is going to be a long-lasting, fundamental change process. So our governance also needs to enable learning and experimentation and reflecting and monitoring. And finally, governance needs to be informed in a way that recognizes different knowledge systems and supports the inclusion of sustainable and equitable values by focusing on those types of knowledge that are currently underrepresented. So if you put this into a pretty figure, it looks like this. You have the four governance approaches operationalized in a specific manner and focused on the indirect drivers. And I want to highlight one of these special ways of operationalizing them, and those are the policy mixes, because these are crucial in transformative governance, because these policy mixes need to together include policies and governance instruments that together can address the indirect drivers underlying a specific sustainability issue. So, and any stakeholder involved in transformative governance can actually do this analysis, reflecting on whether a policy proposal includes those policy instruments that together can actually address the indirect drivers underlying a proposal or underlying a problem. So we can analyze how the Green Deal or the European Union biodiversity strategy or the from food to fork, from farm to fork strategy, whether those proposals actually include a policy mix that will allow us to address the indirect drivers underlying that specific sustainability issue. All right, moving on to my third and last point that I wanted to make and share with you today. I want to go back to the concept of transformative change. And remember that transformative change includes in terms of paradigms, goals, and values. So it really means a fundamental change in terms of the values that are central to our societies. It's basically a change in terms of the key characteristics of our societies, trying to make sustainability the norm and not the exception. And this is especially important on biodiversity issues because it touches upon how we see our relationship with nature and also with other creatures, but also broader for sustainability issues beyond biodiversity, for our thinking, for example, what we think a sustainable agriculture or food system entails. So therefore, I propose to also transform our thinking on the concept of sustainable development from the current mainly anthropocentric perspective, in which we see sustainable development as taking care of future human generations, to a more ecocentric perspective, in which we see sustainable development as living in harmony with other living beings. And these ecocentric values are already emerging in our Western societies. I see it all around me. And of course, they have been an integral part of non-Western societies for centuries. So therefore, I propose adding an 18th Sustainable Development Goal on animal concerns. This is needed because the interests of the individual animal are often neglected, also in biodiversity policy, where animals are often seen as a representative of a species or biodiversity, and often the individual animal gets lost in our thinking about biodiversity policy. And by adding this 18th SDG, and I realize the UN will probably not formally add an SDG, but I think we can integrate the thinking and the interests of the individual animal in our implementation of the SDGs the next 10 years. And by doing so, it becomes explicit that for the individual animal is an integral part of sustainable development. So we're actually literally changing our views and our definition of what sustainable development means. And that is a change in terms of values or paradigms or goals. And by adding the 18th SDG, it also supports the emancipation, if you will, of the environmental SDGs from a more anthropocentric to an ecocentric perspective. And it also reflects these changing relationships and these changing values on the thinking on the relationships between humans and non-humans. So if we incorporate the interest of the individual animal in our thinking on sustainable development, we can actually develop one overarching guidance system for transformative change, for sustainable development, which includes human, environmental, and animal concerns. Thank you very much. I very much look forward to hearing what you think of all this, and I look forward to exchanging views on all this during the rest of the workshop. Thank you for your attention.